education course. They had been white-hot for each other from the first day of that long-ago spring semester when she had entered his classroom, sat down in the front row, and, braless, leaned forward to get her notebook out of her pack. He had looked away, then back, and she was staring at him. That afternoon they had coffee. That night they made love. It was great, and in the morning it was even better. A week later, she moved in with him. Partway through Jocelyn's senior year, she got pregnant. She took it more calmly than he did. To his surprise, she didn't want an abortion. More surprisingly, she didn't want to have the child outside of marriage. That was a relief to him. Getting involved with a student was bad enough. Knocking her up was even worse. But to have a love child? He wasn't sure if the administration would be liberal enough to let that go, even though he was one of their golden boys, a rising star. They got married over the spring holidays. She received her diploma showing a belly as big as a watermelon. That summer, their first son, Clancy, was born. Having a child completed Jocelyn's maturation process. She quit smoking marijuana, gave up drugs altogether, and became a card-carrying grown-up. 2 years later, they had another boy who they named Tom, and a year and a half after that, Will, their third and last child, was born. Walt loved his sons, but he would have liked a daughter. Jocelyn, though, was happy with the boys. No hidden agendas, no subterfuge. She knew all about girls' perfidies. Hadn't she snagged Walt, the glamorous professor who all the undergraduate girls had drooled over? After Clancy was born, Jocelyn went back to school, got her master's, and then, after having her other boys, finished her Ph.D. in sociology. The school offered an instructorship and then an assistant professorship. She didn't shine in her field like Walt did in his. Few do. But she was good. She was solid. And everyone who knew her loved her. She was a genuine sweetheart. The professors Gaines had a good marriage. It had lasted. Stepping outside their small dwelling, Walt inhaled the night's sweet, almost cloying perfumes and looked around at the familiar surroundings, a group of small, thatch-roofed huts that were clustered in the clearing. Besides those used for sleeping, volunteer diggers were generally bunked 4 to a hut, although 5 or 6 could be squeezed in if there were more workers than space. There was a communications center kitchen, an open dining pavilion, and 2 large buildings for storage. Solar-heated showers were located outside, back behind the main building. It was a rudimentary, simple system, but it worked. The complex had been built over the past 3 years from scratch. The small area where the buildings were situated had been hacked out of the jungle by a native crew of chicleros, men who roamed the dense forest looking for rubber trees. One of them had discovered this site by accident, which is often how important ruins in Central America are found. He was looking for rubber trees in a remote, unexplored section of the jungle and had stumbled upon it by accident. The site had been named La Chimenea because the tallest pyramid was shaped like a chimney. The tight little living structures were similar to the dwellings in which the Maya had lived on this very spot over 1,500 years ago. The walls were made of thin tree trunks, trumpet trees mostly, held together with strangler vines and baling wire, and the high-pitched roofs, tight, dense, virtually waterproof, were constructed from bay-leaf palms woven together in a tight mosaic. The few modern conveniences were rough-poured concrete floors, screened windows, and the propane and diesel tanks that powered their electric needs, their computers, and other communication devices, and for kitchen essentials like ice. The student volunteers who stayed and worked here pissed in the jungle and crapped in holes in the ground. They loved it. Walt had been taking tours to archaeological sites throughout Central and South America for more than 2 decades. During semester breaks, he had led field trips that typically ran for 2 or 3 weeks. These groups were comprised of about 20 people, mostly students, but also older people who were interested in archaeology and wanted an experience off the beaten track. The tours hopscotched from ruin to ruin: Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras. 2 or 3 days at a location, then moving on to the next one. It was grueling, all that bouncing around on terrible roads in 100-degree heat, but they covered a lot of ground. Jocelyn had often accompanied him, especially after their sons had reached adulthood and no longer needed her attention and supervision. These field trips had been important in helping him and Jocelyn supplement their incomes. Being university professors, they were comfortably middle class, but they liked to live nicely. The income they'd put away from these trips helped augment their modest portfolio of conservative mutual funds. Once La Chimenea had been discovered, however, and Walt had been given the responsibility of developing it, he stopped conducting these short tours. All his time and energy became concentrated on the site. Being invited to participate alongside him was rigorous and competitive. Hundreds of applications flooded Walt's office every term. From these, he carefully selected a privileged handful, prime graduate students from universities all over the country, mixed in with a few of his own overachieving underclassmen. There was one big difference between these groups and the shorter trips he had led in the past. Non-degree applicants were rarely accepted. There were too many candidates who were deserving and needful of studying in the field under the guidance of the renowned Walt Gaines. They had been on site for almost 3 months this time around. After flying to La Chimenea and settling in, they had immediately begun working their butts off. It was hard, meticulous, back-stiffening labor, like spending 8 hours a day taking a splinter out of a baby's foot. You had to be so delicate. A meter-square quadrant at a time, carefully lifting the dirt, sifting it, brushing it, one fragment of a pot shard after another. The students' attitudes had changed considerably from when they had first arrived at the site. That always happened. It was a rite of passage, especially for those who had never actively worked on a dig. At the start, when they were all bright-eyed and full of gung-ho exuberance, they would take copious notes when Walt would lecture on the day's findings. Then they would all get together for communal dinner, drink beer, and talk. It was like being in the best and most exciting summer camp in the world. They loved it, even when it hurt like hell. By the end of the first week, though, when they'd had bellyfuls of work under their belts, the note-taking became more desultory. Days of painstaking toil under the hot, unrelenting sun made them too exhausted to make much of an effort, and their notepaper turned to mush in the heavy, oppressive vegetal moisture. Besides, being here wasn't about learning from books, observing a subject from a distance through an abstract prism. This was learning by way of your calluses, performing hard, meticulous, grinding work. The expectation was no longer a good grade and being part of history-making, as it had been when they signed up. Their desires became immediate and mundane. A cold beer at the end of the day, a change into dry clothes, maybe sex if you got lucky. In that regard, a loose decorum was observed, which was breached easily and without fuss. Those who needed privacy would disappear into the jungle for an hour at the end of the workday. Now, their summer of work was over. Everyone except Walt was sleeping. They were exhausted. The last few days had been spent cataloging the work they'd done here on site, gathering the items they were allowed to remove for study, and securing their tools, photo equipment, all their various and sundry gear they were bringing back home. Walt wasn't wearing his watch, but he could tell from the position of the moon that it was well past midnight. From out of the darkness came the cacophony of the jungle, Howler monkeys screeching in the trees, cries of predatory cats like puma, calls of